Did you know that Mordenkainen Presents Monsters of the Multiverse has classes and subclasses? But they aren't exactly for players. GameMasters here, covering a pretty strange turn and twist found in this book. I've been poring over this since I got it, and I noticed this right away, but I just couldn't quite wrap my head around what exactly it was I was seeing. I mean, this book is called Monsters of the Multiverse, and I went into it with the preconceived notion that it would contain, well, just monsters. We knew from leaks that there were also going to be monsters presented as playable races. Centaurs, tabaxi, kobolds, we even did a video on that one. Kinku, orcs, goblins, just to name a few. And these are presented in a section called Fantastical Races. Now, we also knew that it was going to contain lots of new monsters, these being the ones presented in a section called Bestiary. Now sure, some were reprinted, but some have not been properly represented in 5th edition yet, at least not with stat blocks, and those now appear in this section. As I mentioned, once I really started poring over what was found inside, I realized that some of the monsters found in the Bestiary, they're not actually monsters, but they're instead classes, and in some instances, subclasses, or what others refer to as archetypes. I'll show you what I mean. This first one, we have the Archdruid. Now, I'm not going to go into a deep dive of their stats and abilities. This video is more focused on my observance of classes found within this book, but the Archdruid is one prime example. This is not a race of monster in any way. It's purely a subclass of, well, druid. And this is interesting. It states right here, an Archdruid typically has one or more pupils who are druids. See the monster manual. Okay, well, let's take a look at the monster manual and examine the table of contents. Let's see. All right, we've got Cyclops, Demi-Lich, Doppelganger, Dryad, Elementals. No, there is no druid. So just on a hunch, let's take a look at the player's handbook. Yep, there it is on page 64. Druid's not a monster, it's a class. And don't get me wrong, this is not a complaint. I'm just making an observation here. I'm fairly laid back DM, and I don't insist that the game stop for 30 minutes while we debate if the Harengen can jump or hop. I'm merely just observing that, and I gotta be honest here, I'm observing that this is something that I've never really, in just over 37 years of DMing, I've never really put 2 and 2 together, and that is that some monsters can have classes. Another example right here on the next page, the Archer. Archer is most certainly not a monster race. It is, however, a class. And I don't think that it's too far of a reach that any given monster could become an archer. I mean, sure, a beholder might find it a touch challenging to use a bow, but an archer is a class. Now, if you're enjoying this video, give that like button a tap. It really helps to support this channel by putting my videos out in front of more eyes, and I really thank you for that. So you want another example? Let's take a look at the Bard. That's a class. Another one, Champion. That's a class of warrior. Then you have the Martial Arts Adept. This is perhaps one of the more obvious subclasses found in Mordenkainen's book. Simply put, it's a subclass of monk, trained in hand-to-hand combat. And then one page over, we have the Master Thief. These guys are a subclass of, well, the Rogue. Another, how about the Swashbuckler? Also a subclass of Rogue, although I believe Xanathar's Guide to Everything refers to them as archetypes. And here we have some subclasses back to back. The War Priest, we have Warlocks, Warlock of the Archfey, Warlock of the Fiend, Warlock of the Great Old One, and look, one page over, Warlord. And one more page over, there is an entire list of wizards, subclasses. You've got the Evoker, Conjurer, Illusionist, Necromancer. I mean, they're all subclasses. Now, I think this is actually really cool. I mean, I mentioned that I've been DMing for over 37 years. And while many of my monsters have had subclasses, I had a big bad evil guy named Grain back in the late 80s and early 90s who was a sorcerer. But his subclass was actually what I called a biomancer. He could transmute living cells. And it's never really occurred to me that the biomancer term was actually a subclass of sorcerer. Though, to be fair, we didn't exactly have the term subclasses back then. We certainly had subclasses. The Paladin had one that was called a Cavalier. But even the Paladin himself or herself was a subclass of the class called Fighter. Thief, yeah, they weren't called rogues back then. Could be an assassin. And there was the, what were they called? It came out, third edition prestige classes. Not exactly subclasses, but they kind of were. Yeah, Mordenkainen Presents Monsters of the Multiverse has loads of subclasses. Now, for those of you that homebrew subclasses for characters, we just recently did a video covering a homebrew subclass for a barbarian called Path of the Contagious Fury. And we'll also continue our coverage of the Mordenkainen's book with all of its monsters. And you can check out those videos here. Are you going to homebrew up some subclasses for monsters? I'd love to see what you can come up with. What would a good subclass for a beholder be? Well, I guess you'd have to define a class for it first. A beholder swashbuckler? Until next our paths cross, may your monstrous subclass figure out a way to multi-class.